Ooh, that looks tasty.
Folks, today the Hungry Gamer is back with another crowdfunding preview, and today we are talking about Kinfire Council, designed by Kevin Wilson from Incredible Dream Studios. And this is a game that is ostensibly a sequel to Kinfire Chronicles, which I am, well, still playing through, doing a playthrough series on the channel. And I know I'm due for one and I just haven't gotten to it. Hopefully I'm going to get to do that next week or the week after to kind of keep going on that. But this game takes place kind of after the conclusion of that game, and now you are kind of rebuilding kind of the world. For those of you that are familiar with Kinfire Chronicles, there's this darkness that's everywhere, and I guess semi-spoiler, you eventually win, and then you're kind of going to be dealing with the fallout of that and trying to rebuild. And in this, you're taking on the role of various counselors trying to have the most prestige in Dinlux as you rebuild it, and you rebuild the surrounding areas, and at the same time trying to keep the cult here from being the ones that kind of take over. Now, with that being said, I do need to point out right now that everything that you see here is still in the prototype phase, and in fact, some of the rules have changed since this was sent to me, and I'm going to do my best to explain the new rules to you, and that does mean that there will be some differences, particularly here on this board. All of these spots here will actually be lined up so you can be orthogonally adjacent to certain ones. And also I should point out that these boards here, as you can see, separate. And that is because in the final version, they're actually going to be tiered levels going up, and that will have little steps going between them as well. The last thing I need to point out specifically, one of the main mechanics in the game is you are building up these lighthouses. And that mechanic has drastically changed from what was sent here. And so what I actually have are paper printouts that I laminated because I'm a nerd, but unfortunately I only had black and white to print. So obviously this is super, super, super prototype, like not even normal prototype. This is my nonsense prototype, but I'm going to show you how it works so you can kind of understand what's going on here. Now, with all of that said, also please make sure you turn your Klingon subtitles, because if I make any mistakes in the rules overview, or I use an old rule instead of a new rule, whatever it may be, that is where you will find any and all of those corrections. I've already given you the explanation of what the game is, so if you're not interested in how this game is played, just want to jump into my final thoughts, then you want to go to the timestamp on the screen right now. For those of us still here, let's talk about how this game gets played. So you're going to play over 5 rounds, and in each round, at the end of the round, you will build a new lighthouse and then move on to the next one. And I'm going to show you that a little bit later. But each round has 3 different phases in it. And in the first phase is kind of just the setup, where you're going to put out 2 new decrees from this deck here. And these are going to be things that you'll be given chances to vote on during the round. And you'll be voting on these things. Whichever one has the most votes is what's going to pass. And you can kind of look there, you can see like this one is just a bad one, where if you don't pass it, something bad happens. But even in this case, something bad happens if you do vote on it. Where this one is just relatively good, it's going to happen right away. There's ones like this, which are special powers that whoever puts the most votes on is going to get, and there's ones like these right here that are going to somehow change the rules of the game moving forward. And during every round of the game, you will have 2 new ones that you will be voting on. Then the next thing that's going to happen is you're going to go into the cultist bag here, and you're going to dig into it, and you're going to draw out 3 cultists. So here we have 1, 2, and 3. And 2 things are going to happen. First, you're going to take those cultists and you're going to put them out onto the board, and they're going to block those worker placement spots. So we have 1, we have 5, and we have 16. Now all of those spaces are blocked. However, if you look over here, there is the threat board. Because we drew a 1 through 6 with the first one, we would flip out a card and we would deal with that. In this case, it's going to happen right away because it has this 0 up in the corner. And so bandits are going to happen, and then you're immediately going to add a coin to the city needs. And I haven't talked about that, but I'll explain that in just a little bit. And then it would be discarded. And that would be simply the end of that. However, the next one was a 5, so we would, again, that first spot, we would draw another one. Now this one has a 5 in the top corner. So I'd place that out. And if the third one I drew was also a 1 through 6, then I would take one of these progress markers and put that on it. And there's ever 5 progress markers on there, that's going to trigger and activate. But I didn't. The last one was up here and was a 16. So that goes over here. I draw a card for there, which has a 4. And that would go right there. Then we're going to move into the game proper. And then every single player is going to have two different things. They'll have their main player board, which will feature one of the seekers from the original game. And you have a nice standee for those here. And they're going to have a power. You're going to have your other workers, which are here just labeled A, B, C, D, and E. And they also do actually have names and a little bit of story behind each one. And you have your influence. Each of the seekers is going to start with a specific power. I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. And you also are going to have your counselor. And you have all of these here. And so each one of these is a person trying to rule Denlux at the end. And so you'll take one and you'll put them out. Each player has something different. And we'll just say that right here is who we're playing. So in this case, all of the workers that Lyra has can be placed outside the city, and that'll make sense in just a little bit. And I'm not going to go too much into those because these have changed fairly significantly as well. However, you're then going to place out your workers. And as you can see here, these are hexagon spaces here, and also on each of the lighthouses you're building, there's hexagons on those there. And that is outside the city. So your circle workers can only go onto the circle spaces, with the exception of the one that I mentioned earlier, while your standee can go on the hexagon spaces, or any of the spaces around the circle. Additionally, as you're playing through, each tier up is harder to get to. You have to pay to go through gates and stuff, and so you actually will be taxed to do that. So if you place on this middle level here, you have to pay 1 coin. If you go to this top level up here, you actually have to pay 2 coins. Though I will point out that there are various skills that you can get right here to upgrade your workers. You simply would take one and you place it on top of that worker, and now they have a new ability that can mitigate that in various ways. So there's a merchant skill that lets you ignore the taxes. And then these taxes would get placed into a little bowl, which I don't actually have a little bowl, but they get placed into a little bowl, and those would be taxes that at the end of the round will get discarded. Then you're going to do whatever it says on the board. And that might be gaining food, it might be gaining crystals, it might be gaining magic or Kinfire. I'm not sure exactly which one it's called, but gaining that. It might be gaining stone. It might be gaining coins. Or it might be upgrading these locations where you're kind of flipping them over and you're going to take one of your influence tokens. And if you do that, you'll wind up getting a bonus anytime someone goes there later in the game. It's also going to get you points depending on what it is that you've upgraded. And all of these spaces can be upgraded. Or you might be going to a place to get these skills that I mentioned. And each skill that's specific that you can get has a specific location that you can learn that skill. And so you're getting resources, or perhaps you'll be voting, as I mentioned earlier up here, or perhaps you'll be getting more of this influence that I also briefly mentioned. Because the influence you're going to have to use to kind of mark things throughout the round. The next thing that you're able to do when you place is if you place orthogonally adjacent to a cultist, you can arrest them. Nice and simple. You take them and it goes onto your player board, and that's actually a resource that you can spend in some of these different locations to get various things. I'll just leave him right there for now. I will also point out that if there's any cultists left on the board at the end of the round, then they will activate again. In this case, we have a 1 and a 5, so we would get 2 more things go there, and we have that 16, so we would get 1 more over there. So they will keep activating if you don't take care of them, and they're going to block spots. I'll also point out that there are cultist leaders that look like this, and that simply means that everything out there is going to be activated, and after you get 2, they're all going to go back into the bag, which also includes cultists that you've captured as they escape. So you kind of got to use them or lose them. The other type of thing that you can get are these cards right here. And these are all powerful cards that all do a wide variety of different things, and they are all completely different. I'll kind of zoom down here. You're going to look a little closer at some of them. So they're going to tell you when you play them, they're going to tell you when you use them, and you're going to be getting those at the various worker placement spots on the board as well. Now, with all of that said, what you're also going to be able to do every round is an errand. And there are, for the most part, unless you have special powers, which many of the counselors do, there are 2 types of errands that you can do. You can fulfill city needs, which I mentioned earlier over here. And currently the city needs 3 food. So if I had a food, I could use an errand. I could pay 1 food and take 1 of my influence off my player board and put it right there. And that's going to get me a point at the end of the game. It's possible to get these tokens called sentries, which mean for every one of those you have, you actually get an extra point for every need that you meet. It's actually a very powerful way to get a lot of points if you are left unchecked. And as I also mentioned, as you go through, it's possible that other needs will get added to the board as you're going through, and now you have to get those every round as well. For every need that is not filled, then a cultist will wind up filling that, which simply means that the next round, 2 more cultists in this case are going to be placed out onto the board and they're going to activate. And that can obviously spiral. Now, I've been mentioning the cult because the cult's going to be getting points throughout the game. And you actually have the ability to align yourself with the cult because the cult is going to take care of the stuff that you don't. So like they're taking care of this, and the cult will eventually start getting points. And so if you actually think during the game that the cult is going to win, which would mean you all lose, you do have the ability through the worker placement spots out there to start aligning yourself with the cult. And that means you win if the cult wins. And everyone can see who's the most aligned with the cult, because whoever has the most tokens in there is going to be the one that's aligned. And the only other thing that I need to point out are the lighthouses, because that is the core of the game. And again, just a reminder that these are super prototypes, and I printed these out myself because it's changed the way they work since the initial prototype was sent. And so there are 5 different lighthouses that are going to be built in these various cities, which those of you who have played Kinfire Chronicles will recognize. And when they're out there, you'll see that they have 2 spaces that you can go to. You can go here and get some stuff, or you can go here and perform 3 errands. I've already told you what the errands are. I've already told you what one of the errands are. The other errand you can do is send resources to the town to build the lighthouse. So in this case, if I send 1 stone, then I get to place 1 of my influence markers right there. If I did 2 stone, I would get to do 2 of them. And if I did 3 stone, if I did 2 crystals, I would get to place 3 of them on there. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow the lighthouse track, that's going to allow us to build up on the lighthouse track. And this is just a bead I'm using to mark this because it's a little bit easier to see. And what you can't see here is this side here represents points that the players will get, and this side here represents points that the cult will get. And every time you do one of these errands to deliver goods, you're going to start going up on this track. And at the end of the round, let's say we ended right here, and so we ended up right here, then each player is going to get 3 points for each one of their influence that they put over here. So in this case, each player would get 9 points. Then this side over here represents the points that the cult will get, and the cult will get 4 points. Though, if perhaps we didn't build on this at all, then each one of the influence tokens would be worth 1 point, and the cult will get 10 points. So it behooves you to work on this both to get points and to keep the cult from getting more and more points. Then once all of that is done, you'll go through, you'll resolve points for the city needs, you'll resolve points for building here, you'll resolve the decrees, see which one of those has passed, and then you will pass along the first player token to the next player, and you'll go and start the next round, which will involve a different lighthouse that you're building, and this will reset down to the bottom. And that's pretty much how this game works. So, what do I like about this game? The first thing is there is a lot of variety in how you play the game. And by that I mean the way that you build your workers up, you give them skills, how you grow them is very different every time you play. It's very different just kind of what the combination is you have of your counselor and the seeker that you use, even though that's a little bit lesser of a thing. But the way that you build up your, I'll call it your army, your workforce, I guess, is very distinct every single time, as is the way that you interact with the game. What is it that's going on? What are you going to try to focus on this game? Because there are a lot of different things that you can do that can earn you points. Might be that different edicts that come out might be worth points. You might focus on the city needs. Maybe you're going to focus on taking out the threats, and. So there's lots of options out there, and it does make the game feel pretty fresh each time you kind of dive in. The next thing that I'll say is, it reminds me a lot, and I don't say this as a negative at all, of Lords of Waterdeep, which is one of my favorite light, simple worker placement games. To me, this feels almost like a Lords of Waterdeep that is hyper advanced. It gives me that same vibe of you're kind of going around gathering things you need, kind of do these different jobs and take care of the things. But you have so many more options that you can play with, so many more ways that you can go and turn and interact with other players and all of that, that I say that in the most positive light that you can possibly imagine it. Next thing I'll say is it does have a lot of kind of fun throwbacks to Kinfire Chronicles. So if you've played through that, it's neat to see these seekers out there working. It's neat to see, that they're doing stuff and the kind of aftermath of Kinfire Chronicles. It's neat to see the cities you're going back to and building these lighthouses. That's all very, very cool if you are a fan of the previous game. Next thing is, and I already alluded to it, I like these edicts that are coming out, that you always have these two different things that you're voting on each round. And sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes it's something that's particularly selfish if you just take it yourself, sometimes not doing anything is harmful or whatever it might be. I really think that adds a fun layer to the game that you have to kind of interact with, or maybe you choose not to interact with and just kind of deal with it and perhaps use the penalty that you may get from those edicts to kind of advance your own agenda. I think that works really, really well. I also love the magic cards that you can get. They're all completely different. They're all unique. It has a real vibe of kind of scratching off a lottery ticket. What am I going to get? Because sometimes you get something that's not really useful this game, but other times you get something that's just fantastic. And so I like the way that works. But what I want to focus on the most, that I find particularly fun and interesting in this game and think works particularly well, is the cult. I like the way that the cultists are going out there on the board. They're blocking things. You have these threats that you have to constantly deal with. All of that is out there. I really like how that works. But at the same time, I like this feeling that the cult, even though I guess they're evil, but they're trying to help in their own way. Like, if you don't take care of the city needs, they will take care of the city needs. If you don't send the supplies to build the lighthouse, they will send the supplies to build the lighthouse. And so you have this other faction that you're kind of playing against that, for the most part, isn't going to win. Like, this is not a co-opetition game, really, because in the games I've played, the cult has never been a threat without anybody helping them along. Which brings me to the next part. I really do like that you have the ability in this game to, if you're halfway through the game, you're like, you know what? This is not working. I have made bad choices. I am not doing well. That suddenly you can be like, you know what? I'm going to throw in with the cult. I'm going to start doing things that boost the cult's power. I'm going to block this area off so they can't arrest this cultist. And I just think that works really, really well. And it's very clever and gives this lovely little option that you have out there. Not to mention that the cultists themselves become resources when you arrest them, but you better use them quick because they'll break out of your jail and all that. I just think that is very clever, works really well. Same thing with the threat cards. When you beat a threat card, well, that becomes a very powerful resource that you can turn in for something if you send a worker to do that. All of that I think works really, really well. So what are my quibbles with the game? First thing is, it's a little bit overwhelming in your first plays, because there are so many choices. And yes, the tiles out there, they're always going to be the same. And yes, you can upgrade them or not upgrade them. But there are so many ways to use the resources, and there's so many things that need your attention. You cannot do everything. And so it can feel overwhelming just to decide, where do you start? What are you going to make your way towards as you're playing? How do you want to use these resources? And the same thing, even with just kind of building up your workforce. Do I want to send someone up there so they can become a merchant? Because if I do that, that means I'll be going up there a lot more. Do I want to have spies so I can grab these cultists? Or what is it that I want to do? There's so many options out there that it can feel overwhelming. And even though it is actually a relatively simple game, it's a little bit challenging to actually teach somebody how to play. And then everything else that I'm going to talk about falls into balance and production. Now, let me be clear. This is a prototype. So there's lots of things that are going to change. And I asked some questions, but unfortunately, I did not hear back in time to be able to not include these things if they're being addressed. So just understand that these are just things that I have a concern about, but I also understand that development is going to come, and obviously this is a prototype. So take all of this with that grain of salt. So talking about gameplay, I'm concerned a little bit about some of the balance. Some of the skills just don't seem like they are as useful. I look at like the artisan skill, which allows you to take advantage of tiles that have been flipped over. Well, that's really only useful if those tiles are being flipped over. If people aren't doing that, that means you're going to have to focus on doing that. So suddenly, that means you're flipping those tiles over, and maybe the artisan skill is not going to connect as well. Now, I will also say it's possible that the artisan skill has been changed from what I have on my table right now, but just something to keep in mind. The other thing that strikes me as perhaps is unbalanced is the city needs. Because when you get the sentry tokens, every city need that you fulfill, you get extra points on it. And the last time we played, Skippy, designer of Lunar Rush, he wiped the floor with us the last couple turns because He had the ability to do 2 errands every turn, and he was filling up those city needs, and he had a whole bunch of sentries, and he was just racing out ahead on points. Now, clearly, all of us could have then just done the city needs as well. But of course, that would be hamstringing everything else we're doing. And so for me, I always look a little bit askance when there is a strategy you can use that requires other players to stop what they are doing to do that as well. And even if it stays as is, that's a pretty minor quibble, and it may not be something that bothers you, but it is something that definitely stuck out to all of us in that last game that we played. And then some of the concerns that I have when it comes to what is the final game going to look like. And again, I suspect a lot of this is going to be changed, but I just did not hear back in time to put it in this video. When I look at the workers, just the little round chits, I wish they played on those stories. Like, they all have little stories about who they are on the player board. So give me a little bit of art. Give me something so I'm like, yeah, yes, this is who it is. I mean, you can put on the backside the letter so you can put it back in the right place and know who it is, but I just wish that the beautiful art that you have on the cards and the character art for the Seekers and all of that, we were seeing more of it. And again, we might. I don't know. And then we found the particular font that was used on the board, on the tiles, to be hard to read. And that might be size, it might just be the font choice and the colors and all of that. But we found it a little bit hard to read. And again, I usually don't talk about these things because this is a prototype. But it was enough that everybody I showed the prototype to made a comment on it. So it's like, okay, take a look at what they have. I suspect what you're seeing on the Kickstarter right now is completely different from what I had on my table, but just something to think about. But so there you have it, folks. That is Kinfire Council. I'm pretty pleased by this. I didn't know what to expect because it is a Euro game, and I love Euro games. But Kinfire Chronicles was such a fun dungeon crawl, especially as a solo dungeon crawl. I just really liked it. This one you're not going to play solo. You got to play with multiple people, so it's a different vibe. And the adventure's over, and now you're kind of doing politics and bureaucracy and all those kinds of things. I just wasn't sure. But I gotta say, it's got a lot going for it. Yes, there's some challenges, I think, in learning it and kind of figuring out how to do anything and be effective, but I think there's a lot in here. And this is one that I'm bummed that the prototype that I have is not updated with all the most recent rules and stuff, because I like it. I really enjoyed this game, and I really am looking forward to playing it again down the road whenever I get a chance to. So there you have it, folks. As always, if I made any mistakes in the rules overview, and I certainly did, please let me know in the comments with the timestamp so I can get that into the click on subtitles. If you found this video useful, please like, subscribe, share, maybe become a channel member. As always, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.